in the Dreyfus administration, that he was a moderate Republican, and that he and many people had an interest in doing something about the increasing amount of money that was flooding into Wisconsin politics and changing the culture of this state that he and many of you have grown up with and didn't like where that was headed. He had recently become a member of the board of Common Cause in Wisconsin, and I got to know him and loved the ideas that he brought. Bipartisanship, of course, was always behind everything that Bill believed in, and cooperation, as has been mentioned here. He did not have anything but a kind word for everybody and anybody, and this includes political people. I've never seen anything actually like it in my life, where people from each end of the political spectrum all loved and adored Bill. People on my side of the spectrum I didn't like, Bill got along with them. People on the other side, Bill got along with them. He got along with everybody. And I think you know the reason why. At the beginning of my tenure at Common Cause, it was after an interview at his house with Governor Earl and Mary Lou Muntz. I made reference to the fact that I had worked with Bill on this legislative study committee, and also the fact that I had been raised as a moderate Republican, a Rockefeller Republican. I thought that might appeal to him. It did. And the fact that his interest in reforming Wisconsin politics was something that all of us shared. It was badly needed at the time. And I began an association with him that, as I mentioned to Tony last night, I think maybe more than any other individual in the state for the last 20 years, other than Tony and his family, I had more daily contact with Bill. Every day began with an email of some sort. He tried to set the agenda not only for Common Cause, but for my day often. With some thought or some point, something that had to be mulled over, discussed. And you always knew, or at least I always knew, when Bill didn't disagree, or when he disagreed with a tactic I took, or a piece that I wrote, or a speech that I gave. The subject line of the email the following day would be, "Anybody for lunch?" And of course, that was his way of telling me that we needed to talk. And again, like Bill, the question was never addressed directly. It was always, "Oh, what about this? And what do you think about this? And have you read this? And have you considered this? And have you seen this movie? And have you tried this for lunch?" And afterwards, I was always more centered. I always felt like I think he just convinced me to do something, I'm not sure what. But it was evident. And so in the years that we were together, you know, you always try to figure out what motivates people to get involved in something like this. Bill was not only an active member of the board, but he was also a member of the National Governing Board of National Common Cause. And he was, at the time that he was on there, the only Republican on the board. And I know that he was prized for that. But the thing about Bill was, while some of us rued the corruption of Wisconsin politics because of the money, we thought the gerrymandering was obviously unfair, we hated the idea of voter suppression, what I really found out about Bill and what drove him passionately to get involved with this activism after his regular career was really the fact that he prized himself above all of being a citizen hall. He hated the professionalization of politics in the country and in the state. And what he despised was all the money that had to go to pay the consultants to draw up the messages, to scare away the voters, and all of the rest that went with that. He was, as has been mentioned by other speakers here, really someone who believed that the people should decide. And he believed that citizens should be the people that drive the politics, not the consultants, not the pollsters. And the best way to explain, I think, how Bill felt about these things was to just sort of read a few things that he said about it. One of the things, though, that he always described when we would lose or come close to winning a reform battle was he would rue the duplicitous Democrats who, if they wanted reform, when they were about to achieve it, often stepped back, or the recalcitrant Republicans who maybe didn't want reform because they knew they could get an advantage if they didn't have it. The thing that was remarkable, I think, about those things is who talks like that? Who uses words like duplicitous and recalcitrant? And that, as you know, was the way Bill was in everything. He was elegant. He was eloquent. He was literate. And he always taught you something. His grandchildren, his friends, people in the Capitol, without being direct about it and telling you to your face what he thought you should do. You learned from it and you absorbed it. What he didn't like about the professional politicians, and it's really about as angry as I've ever heard him describe anything. He wrote that campaign managers, pollsters, media mavens now fill our legislature and our executive offices. It's the new Tammany Hall, he wrote, full-time and fully funded. Now, he assumed you were smart enough to know what Tammany Hall was. And if you weren't smart enough, he assumed that you would take the initiative to find out what Tammany Hall was. But that's how he described it. He said this new version of Tammany Hall is much less visible and less tightly organized, history tells us, than the real Tammany Hall. There is no campaign management association that I can find, he wrote. It's even hard to find out who is running what and why. Then he cut to the chase. He said, this is all about who is running things and who is not. They are, you and I are not. Bill had a prescription even for this most vexing problem that plagued him, I think, throughout his life, his political life certainly. And what he said was, the old Tammany rigged elections at the voting booths with ballot tricks. The new Tammany strategy is more media and timing driven. A big, unexpected, too late to respond to media attack just before the election is a favorite new Tammany tactic. Get smart. Don't fall for it. Vote against it. Vote against the money you don't like. Vote against the incivility. Again, incivility. Who uses that word anymore? Vote in every election, for every office. Politics is not a best TV commercial contest. Politics is about finding the best people for increasingly difficult and challenging jobs. Find them. Vote for them. That was as angry as I'd ever heard Bill write or say. He wanted to give politics back to the people. Let the people decide. Right before the November election of this year, I received this gem from him. Unsurprising endorsement for Evers from the Cap Times. Somewhat surprising one from the State Journal, based on the value of split government. Which brings to mind the Gannett question. We know that the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel doesn't endorse. Is that true of the whole Gannett family? Quite a change from the 60s when we ran an ad for Knowles, which was a small scroll of nothing but newspaper endorsements. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel started giving up power for money in the mid-70s. They gave up the ghost altogether when they sold out to Gannett. The problem is not fake news, it's weak news. Perfect. Poetic. A gem. It was a superb editorial and a tiny little tidbit, which he sent, I think, only to me. Who writes like that? The final email I got from Bill in November was, and this is something that will ring true with all of you that know him, and it's already been expressed. Bill wanted you to read books, but it wasn't just any book. He wanted you to read the books he wanted you to read. The list went on about all the books I didn't read and what was the matter with me for not getting to them. So in this email, I don't know if you've gotten to We the Corporations. If so, or even if not, you may find these excerpts helpful. Microsoft isn't the billions it owns. It isn't the people it employs or the shareholders it serves. It is an intricate legal fiction woven by lawmakers and lawyers. We treat corporations as if they were real entities, like tigers or humans. But then, he implored of me in this email, do you think Common Cause might be interested in reversing 200 years of judicial precedent? This is not a small request he's making. And to those of you that knew Bill and loved him as I did, he said, of course, this, if not you, who? If not now, when? And I know he exhorted that to many others in all the facets of his life. It was this powerful way of saying focus, act, throw the petty disagreements aside, look at the big picture and move. Move now. This is from a person who led a life well led and embraced. It was embraced by all who loved him and deeply loved in return. When he left the Common Cause Board 2 years ago to take on bigger issues, he sent me this email. Abjure adjectives. You all know what that means. He didn't like the descriptive part of politics. Abjure adjectives. Avoid nagging. Put the duplicitous Democrats to test if and when they come out of the wreckage of 2016. Don't renounce the recalcitrant Republicans. Find opportunities to work with them if you can. Help lead them back to the light. Bill was a light in my life, as I know he was in all of yours. And when he left the board of Common Cause, he stayed in touch. We still had lunch. But he turned it over to another adult in politics, his friend and mine, Tim Cullen, who also has a few things to say about Bill. Thank you.
Well, awfully difficult acts to follow. I will do my best. It is a great honor, beyond just that word. It is an incredible honor for me to be asked by Tony and Marcia and Sally to say a few words. This means more to you to me than you can imagine, and I thank you very much for that. This isn't a funeral, but it's the closest thing we're going to have to one, I guess. I thought that one of the wisest things said about things that people say at funerals was said in 1968 at the funeral of assassinated presidential candidate Bobby Kennedy by his brother Edward Kennedy. And Edward Kennedy said about his brother, he said, he need not be made larger in death than he was in life. And I think that's advice often not taken at the funerals I've been to, but we don't have to worry about that today. There is no chance that we can make Bill any larger than he really was, and it hasn't happened yet, and I'll try to do my part. Another thing that I enjoy, saying I enjoy, is that someone once said it in front of a gathering, said that this was the greatest gathering of talent since Thomas Jefferson dined alone. And I really think that we could just replace Thomas Jefferson's name with Bill Kraus's name. I really do believe that. I love the guy. Men aren't so good at saying that, you know, but I did, and I do. I thought, and I think, he was the most interesting man in Wisconsin. I really believe that. He was somebody, as all of you who've had a chance, he would love to be able to be with Kraus and listen to whatever he wanted to talk about that day, almost all of which I didn't know until he told me. He was a great advisor. Whatever he thought about something meant a whole lot to me, and I'm forever grateful for that. We had lots of lunches together. I first met him in '79 when he came down with Dreyfus for that cohort from the north that Speaker Lawton just alluded to. It was fun working with him. I'm this kind of young Democratic senator, and we had a great relationship. Played golf a few times. It was a good time in Wisconsin politics. Then we kind of went our own separate ways and went off. He in New York for a while, and me off to business and so on. And we reconnected in '07 on the Common Cause board. And that was a lot of fun to really learn from him again. And I really enjoyed it. But the biggest thrill of all was the lunches. I loved having lunch with Bill Kraus. I would drive to Madison from Janesville for the sole purpose of having lunch with Bill Kraus. I had nothing else to do here. As increasingly went on, the politicians were not very interested in my views on how we ought to actually run government, but it was fun with Kraus. He would tell me about all the books he read. He probably saved me having to read like 100 books. Gave me a chance to read some other books. But it was great. He would say, you know, I read this book by so-and-so on such and such. It's not worth it except for chapter 5. Thank you. I kind of take notes. Our lunches never lasted less than 2 hours. If I came up here for lunch at noon, I never scheduled anything in Janesville until at least 4 o'clock. Lunch might go for 3 hours, and I'd still have the hour to get back home. It was like having a PhD class or something with Kraus. Even for a state senator, I was capable of speaking less than the person I was having lunch with. That was not an easy task. I considered him, he helped me so much with the book I wrote, which I'm not shilling for, I don't make any profits on it, but he helped me so much with it because I really believed he was like a walking history book of the last 65 years of Wisconsin politics. And I started doing some numbers. Think about it. He knew the last 14 governors of Wisconsin, all the way back to Walter Kohler Jr. He knew 14 governors. That actually is 31% of all the governors Wisconsin's ever had. Kraus knew them. It kind of puts in perspective the scope of the time that he has impacted Wisconsin. Now, unlike some of the other speakers, I'm going to try to cover exactly what I was asked to talk about here. I was just on the edge of my seat waiting for Haney and Loftus to talk about compromise. Maybe they could get in the corner and y'all could go over there and ask. What I liked about Kraus was he wanted to influence power, for sure, but he had no desire to suck up to it. And thank you, by the way, for not having us in a church. I might not have wanted to use that term in some holy chamber, but I thought I could get away with it here. It was just, that was the difference between him and so many other people around this town who wanted to just be part of the power and be near the power and say they talked to the power yesterday or whatever. Kraus wanted to influence them. He didn't even care if they didn't like him. And some of them didn't. And that was to Bill's credit. He also figured out something that I think a lot of people don't do. He cared about all the individual issues that all of us care about. We all could give our litany of issues. We care about the university, we care about healthcare, we care about science and the DNR, we care about the environment, we care about public education, and we all have our list. He cared about all those too, but he understood that none of those would get done the way he wanted or the way the majority of the people wanted unless you fixed democracy, unless you fixed the system that acted or didn't act on those issues. And so he kind of, he didn't focus on them. He focused on fixing what was wrong. And he really came down, as I worked with him, he really came down to two things: maps and money. All the things that were wrong, he figured out and focused on those two. And by the way, I see John Nichols over there, terrific column this morning in the Wisconsin State Journal on Bill Kraus, if you haven't had a chance. Man, gerrymandering offended Kraus to the core. And I can give you 10 things that are wrong with gerrymandering, but the thing that really drove him nuts, not really, but what really bothered him the most was that in gerrymandering, a legislator could have their election decided the day the map was drawn, rather than on election day. That was right at the core of what this man could not stand. Money. There's always been money in politics. A lot of times you bring up money in campaigns and people's eyes glaze over. There's been money forever. Julius Caesar probably had a super PAC. I don't know. Kraus would probably know, but I don't. But it bothered him not only just the gobs of money that are in politics today, it bothered him the secrecy of the money. The ability of the voters not to know who funded the ad that did this or said that. That bothered him the most. There was this secrecy. And he wanted to fix it. And he didn't fix it. And I don't know who's going to fix it, but he certainly tried. One of the things that he learned, and I learned, and I agree with him on, is that when you're on Common Cause or when you're working, trying to change the course of the government, improve it, one of the sad things that you find out, and this is irrespective of party, it's as true with Republicans as it is the Democrats. When you're over in the Capitol trying to get reforms passed, the minority party is always for you. They don't have the power to do what you want them to do. Then what happens is the minority party that was all for you gets in the majority, and by golly, they kind of like it the way it is. And all of a sudden, they aren't so much for reform. And Bill and I were both very, very frustrated by that. But he was a fine man, a wonderful man, and I could just by closing, all I can really say when I really, really think about him is, Bill Kraus, what a guy.
So, in summary, fully aware that it is such a challenge for all of us to wrap our minds around the legacy and the impact and the influence of this great man, that this service or gathering has already exceeded the time of Poppy Bush's funeral. But that's okay, because there's still, I hope, more to be said, and if it's redundant, all of us here would like to think that if we weren't Bill's best friend, that we were one of his very favorite friends. So it's fun and important for us to just relish this moment as long as we can. My friendship with Bill was founded more than 20 years ago at the intersection of politics and campaign finance reform, and our shared belief that good government was worth fighting for and that the fight could be fun. Bill was at that time retired, but of course not in retreat. He still wore a big R, but it was cut from the cloth of an old boat that was all wool and a yard wide that was to be worn with pride. He was a political strategist and operative and commentator and a mentor then. Shaded by this, his work shaded now by this nostalgic refrain for that time when campaign consultants, as many of us have said today, were believers, not mercenaries. If you read Bill's rules of government that are in your program, you'll see revealed not cynicism, but a very strategic realism and pragmatism. He was also a determined optimist. He said, money is not going away, nor is the campaign business, but citizens' participation, like Humpty Dumpty, can be put back together again. So Bill was that rare bird, I don't know of a single other, I've never read of another, who made his name as a political operative and then was honored for his leadership in civic engagement by whips this last year. His was a leadership style that was understated. It was always an insistent invitation to make your mark by doing the right thing, to find strength in discovering the nexus of integrity and action in concert with others, to read and vote and pass the torch. I asked him this fall if he wouldn't write an op-ed for Sarah Godlewski, who was running for treasurer, and it was classic. It was totally, it was what I should have expected, but we all have sort of a mental format of what an op-ed supporting a candidate looks like. His starts as a historical investigation of the constitutional organization of Wisconsin's government. He laments the partisan assassination for treasurer, noted the ways that governors and legislators have diminished this in like positions, and then in the last paragraph he said, I intend to vote for Sarah, and hope you might as well, so that she could do the good work she promises for all of us. It was an invitation. He had disappointments in his work. He was a great believer, and he maintained his optimism, but there were serious disappointments. One of them, he was a great believer in the Wisconsin idea and the University of Wisconsin to serve as a laboratory of ideas to inform better policy and a crucible for citizenship. And he worked with Bob Lang and Tony Earl and others to support Karen Bogenschneider's Family Seminars initiative that brought real evidence-based research and counsel to the legislators in the Capitol to try to inform the crafting of public policy. And it was his deep lament that we heard far and wide when UW no longer found it a funding priority. In December 2017, he reported the deaths of John Anderson and the Republican Party. In classic good humor and humility, he brought together named the has-beens, acknowledging the reality of our age, but defying ageism by helping find ways for everyone to have continued impact. He invited them to turn to the next generation. Both Bill and I agreed that our hope lay with empowerment of the millennial generation. Bill was, after all, and think about it, he was cut of the very same fabric. Consider the entrepreneurial nature of the Dreyfus campaign, Bill's role in cable TV at its inception. A life of reinvention and entrepreneurship put him well ahead of his time. And so there were dinners between the has-beens and the emerging millennial leaders, forging a shared language and expertise, sharing their expertise and vision for the future. This World War II veteran believed our times provide these millennials an opportunity for heroism, to become the next greatest generation by addressing political reform and climate change and income inequality and violence against women. This was a man who had no hatred in his body for anything, people or ideas. And so you would hear generous observations, like just 2 days before he died, I was asking him for a prediction for that for 2019. And this is what he wrote to me. Walker will pick up a Protestant parish somewhere in the one Wisconsin area where they don't know how he screwed up. He also wrote, oh, Voss and Fitz have caught the Trump virus. Lying. He had an elegant bearing, a courtly way. He was entirely unpretentious. And he had, if you've noted, an established reputation as an epicure. But I feel obligated because we shared dinner, cooking for each other once a month. The irony that he didn't eat eggplant or legumes. And he didn't really taste the difference between a fine or an ordinary red wine. He was, as everyone said, an avid reader, as profoundly knowledgeable about history as anyone, and he used it very effectively as a tool. He drew on it in his prolific writings to inform and make a case. But Bill was never a slave to it. I discovered the depths of his unapologetic conservatism at the bridge table. He rejected all new conventions. He was a straight-shooting bidder who bid them as he saw them. He was hostile even to that very, I would argue, open subterfuge of a short club open. We had so much fun. By the way, Tony's given me permission to let you know that we're looking for a fourth. Tony and Helen. So much fun. Our monthly dinners were pure joy and how not. Bill and Tony's love was infectious, generous, patient, and realistic, instructive to us all. It was marked by their individual independence and their respect for each other. They held family close, they held family together, first in line, always. Tony never let Bill assume the posture of a 92-year-old. Bill, get that 30-pound turkey out of the oven. Last year. Bill managed the menus and did the grocery shopping for the endless stream of guests. There was always room at their table for one more. We all felt lucky to be awash in their warm hospitality. So for Marcia and Sally and Nancy, and I think it's probably true for the grandchildren as well, losing your dad at any age is really hard, and it will feel like nothing you do is quite as important without watching. And for Tony, of course, the strong presence